Okay, thank you. Good morning, good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on good practices in risk and crisis communication. We have organized this webinar within the project Roadmap 2, and shortly I will present some short notes on this project. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you who are participating and attending this webinar, and I would like to thank as well the two structures who organized the webinar, so ADAI from Portugal and the University of Tartu from Estonia. So thank you very much for this nice organization. And I want to say my warm thanks to the three speakers, so Bengt Johansson, Patricia Kaspar, and Marina Mantini, who will be presented in some more details later. I am Daniela Di Bucci. I am the coordinator of the Roadmap 2 project. And let me share with you a brief introduction of the project, and then we will go on with the webinar. So I would like to share my screen. Yes. It's okay. Okay. I hope you see my screen. So Roadmap 2 is the acronym for a project called European Observatory of Disaster Risk and Crisis Management Best Practices or Good Practices. Way Ahead. Way Ahead is related to Roadmap 2, where we will see that it's a second round of project. The consortium of Roadmap 2 is composed by five structures. The first one is the Civil Protection Department of Italy. This administration coordinates the project. I work in that department. Then there is CI3R, the Italian Center for Research on Risk Reduction. That's a scientific entity from Italy. It includes 9 competent centers of the Italian Civil Protection Department, and in particular in this project, CIMA, EUCENTER, and RELUIS are affiliated entities who work in this activity. Then we have the University of Stavanger from Norway. We have ADAI, so the Association for the Development of Industrial Aerodynamics from Portugal, and the University of Tartu from Estonia. The project is funded by the GIECO, the Civil Protection, European Civil Protection, under the structure of the Knowledge Network. A few words on Roadmap 1, or let's say Roadmap, a project that was developed in 2021 and 2022. In that project, we realized some important products. For instance, the Solutions Explorer. That's an open source web platform where we upload good practices in disaster risk management, and that is available for review. We will see this later. Then we produced 8 periodical bulletins, 3 thematic papers, 1 vision paper for the GIECO, and 3 webinars. So we have a long-lasting tradition on webinars. They work very well. So we continued in this second round. Why second round? Because at the end of Roadmap, we understood that some specific challenges had to be still overcome to achieve progress in the construction of an active and involved community to improve knowledge, understanding, and applicability in disaster management. So,
Daniela, excuse me, but we are still having problem with your sound.
So, oh, yes. So, sorry.
Don't worry. So just to tell you that it's not being well received by most of us.
May I try to change my microphone? I don't know. Is better? Can you hear me?
Still with some noise, but okay.
Okay, I try. I moved to the two main objectives that we have in Roadmap 2. It's the first one is establishing a community for the European Observatory of Good Practices. So a community of experts made up with it includes scientists and decision makers and operational people from disaster risk management and civil protection. And the second objective is the knowledge building and sharing through a cycle of seminars, webinars, collaborative workshops, and so on. So we have three main keywords that are good practices in disaster risk management, a community of experts that work together, and knowledge building and sharing. These are the three keywords in our project. All of these is under as I said, the European Civil Protection Knowledge Network. The project is organized in 5 work packages. The first one, of course, is related to the management, so reporting management in general. The second one is really important, is related to the build-up of the community for the European Observatory of Good Practices. And some scientists, as I said, from different countries and people from different civil protection and operational structures are in. Then we have a work package related to the selection of good practices and the scenarios. In particular, in this case, we defined the framework for identifying and assessing good practice in disaster management. So there is a conceptual part, and we developed scenarios that can be used in exercises and other kind of activities. The fourth work package is on the Solutions Explorer. So, as I said, it's a portal, a web portal, where we upload good practices that we selected through the procedure I described. And here you can see the link. You can go and have a look on what is already there. The Solutions Explorer is based on the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and takes also into account the European disaster resilience goals. So the good practices are classified, also taking into account these important documents. And finally, we have the work package 5 on the knowledge sharing, and in this work package we have the organization of collaborative workshops, webinars, and here we are, test exercises, website and social media, and flash reports. Last but not least is the project website. You see here the link, and I can say that all the records of the webinars are available at that link. So if you want to see again some parts of some parts that will be taken in this webinar, you will find them there. And with this, I stop here to share my screen, and I'm happy to leave the floor to Professor Domingos Viegas for his opening part. And thank you very much. Over.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you for your presentation. It was a pity that the sound was not technically good, but I think that we could follow your let's say, presentation of the project and the introduction to what is the objective of the project. I'm speaking on behalf of ANAI team. We are in charge of managing these webinars, and this is the second webinar that we are organizing. I'd like also to thank Katie Oru, who put together the topic and the attendance. These webinars are a very important part of our project. As Daniela said, we are looking for good practices in crisis management, in multi-risk problems. And one of the problems is certainly the communication of the risk in the case of crisis. This is very challenging, and for that we organized this second webinar. The first webinar was on foresight, and it was very well accepted and very much participated. And now we have this second one on this very important topic, and I'm sure that you will be, all of us will use very well these 2 hours that we are going to attend this meeting. I'd like to ask all those of you that are attending for the first time that this meeting is being recorded, and it will be later available on YouTube. So all the presentations that will be given will be available for you. You can intervene asking questions to the speakers using the question and answers box. You can type a question, and if possible, during the period of discussion, the questions will be replied. Some of them, if they require only a short response, they'll be responded by written. Or if there is no time, we will keep them for the final period of discussion, or send you later the question, the replies. All the attendants will receive as a proof of participation if they request that, and I wish you all the best for the webinar. I give now the floor to Sten Hansson who will make the presentation of the webinar. Sten.
Thank you very much. My name is Sten. I'm an associate professor of communication at the University of Tartu. I'm a member of the Risk and Resilience Research Group together with Professor Kati Orru. And it is a pleasure to moderate this discussion today. So the topic for today's meeting is good practices in risk and crisis communication. So risk communication is about educating people about how to identify different kinds of hazards and how to prepare for the impact of those hazards. And crisis communication is about warning people and also giving behavioral instructions during disasters and crises. But all of this communication is, of course, about saving lives, and it is really important to learn from both the successes and failures of those practices in different contexts and in different countries. So I'm really pleased that we have 3 speakers today. First, we will hear from Professor Bengt Johansson, who is a professor of journalism, media, and communication department at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. He has completed a research project on crisis communication and social trust, which is very important. And also he has recently published a study on instruction as self-protection, something that we look forward to hearing about. Domingos, would you like to say something about Patricia?
Of course, it's a pleasure for me to introduce Mrs. Patricia Gaspar, who is Secretary of State of Internal Affairs in Portugal. She is a member of a government that will end its activity, let's say, in 1 week from now, but she is still in office. I'm very thankful to Patricia Gaspar for having accepted our invitation. You have already some lines of her curriculum, but I would like to say perhaps something more personal, that we Portuguese, we praise very much for the work of Patricia Gaspar. Of course, she is a lady of activity. Since her very early age, she has been always linked to this problem of life-saving, to civil protection, and also dealing with communication. But I'd like to say that Mrs. Patricia Gaspar joined the Civil Protection Service in 2017. Immediately, let's say, in the year of the very big fires and very big disaster that we have in Portugal, as you may know, we had 2 big events of fires, one in June with 52 fatalities and 66 fatalities, and another in October with 52 fatalities. And Mrs. Patricia was caught in the middle of this. And we all remember that there was a very big communication crisis there, because the service could not communicate well with the people, and there was a sort of a break. And it was, in my opinion, Patricia Gaspar, when she came, who did a very good work, let's say, of putting together this link with the media and with the public, and creating a completely new way of communicating between the civil protection and the public in this very bad situation that you had that year. I think that this is enough to say what we owe to Mrs. Patricia Gaspar and all that she has done, and we still hope she'll do. Thank you.
Thank you, Domingos. Thank you, Patricia. And the third speaker today is Dr. Marina Mantini. She is the head of communications at CIMA Research Foundation and also a mother of 3 kids. And she is completing a project on identifying the strength and weaknesses of risk awareness campaigns. So the third talk is going to be on how to identify good practices specifically concerning risk awareness campaigns. But yeah, let's start first with Professor Bengt Johansson. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And of course, thank you for inviting me to this Roadmap 2 webinar. I will start sharing my screen and then I will start my presentation. See how it works. Okay, does it look okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I'm really happy to share some of my thoughts with you. As Sten said, my name is Bengt Johansson in Swedish, or Bengt Johansson if you prefer to say it in English. And I'm a professor in journalism and mass communication in Gothenburg, Sweden. And I actually started out as a scholar in journalism and political communication, but over the years I've been more and more interested in risk and crisis communication. And the last 10 or 15 years I've been doing research on crisis and risk communication, which I think is a very important field. And today I'm going to talk about instruction as self-protection. Please follow the instructions. But I just say something. Sten mentioned that I have finished a project about trust and crisis communication, and I've also been involved in a lot of projects during the pandemic about COVID-19 and crisis communication. And this is a book called Communicating a Pandemic, Crisis Management and COVID-19 in the Nordic Countries, which I co-edited with Øyvind Diden in Norway, Jenny Lindholm in Finland, and Mark Black-Ørston. And you can download this from the internet if you want to for free. It's a big edited volume with Nordic scholars writing about the crisis communication during the COVID-19 from varieties of perspectives, which you might find interesting. But today, as I said, I will talk more about instructional self-protection. And when we talk about instruction, it's everywhere, right? When we talk about risk and crisis communication, when we have this kind of earthquake warning system, this is a picture of an app warning for earthquakes, that's instructional self-protection. When we have this kind of emergency preparedness, that you had to make a plan, build a kit, be informed, that is instructional self-protection. When we talk about taking the vaccine, how do COVID-19 vaccines work? Vaccines help your immune system fight infections faster. That is instructional self-protection. Or when campaigns about quit smoking, stop smoking, feel the benefits, increase your life expectancy, reduce the risks of serious illness, have more energy, improve your sense of taste and smell, or save money. That's also the same thing. And of course, wearing face masks. This is a picture from US, I think, about different kinds of face masks you could use during the pandemic. We didn't use any of them in Sweden, of course, but the rest of the world used face masks, and this is a clear example of instruction as self-protection. That means that we use messages to help people to prepare themselves and protect themselves. So what I'm about to dig deeper into today in this presentation is a chapter which I wrote together with my colleague Gabriela Senstig, also from University in Gothenburg, on this topic in this handbook, who was edited by Timothy Selno and Diana Selno from Clemson University in the US. And the book is called Communicating Risk and Safety. It's also edited volume, a lot of chapters, and chapter 19 was ours, which was pinpointing instructional elements in crisis and risk communication. What we tried to do was to give an overview of this topic of instructional communication and the theoretical underpinnings, but also look at one model, which I will tell you more about soon, the IDEA model, but also how that relates to other models out there like the CERC, the PADM, and the EPPM, and so on. There's a lot of acronyms out there, and I would just give a short glimpse into what I think is an important lessons to learn for us working with risk and crisis communication, also practice that. How does these models relate to each other? So what we started out with was that when we looked at the literature, we believe that three things being a bit neglected or underdeveloped in the field of instruction of self-protection. And what we argue was that the theoretical underpinnings of instructional communication could be more developed. What are the theories about learning here? But also theories about message design and ways of designing messages is also sometimes a bit underdeveloped. And also probably one lesson to learn is that there's a bit too much focus on one-way communication. So we started out to try to dig a little bit deeper into the field of instructional communication. And instructional communication, I won't say much about this, just a little glimpse about what it's about. It's a theoretical framework developed from classroom studies about learning processes, how people learn, how students learn, and also how teachers teach, and how to be successful in actually telling the students and learning students what to do and how to think about things. So it's about communication, it's about instructions, and it's about learning theories. And the field, as I said, started in classroom studies in pedagogy, but it's also been expanded to different fields and also into risk and crisis communication. And this is where I fit into this field, because the colleagues I talk about, Tim and Diana Selno, have developed this IDEA model, which is based on learning theory like John Yu and Kolb and others. So they started to develop this model of message design, how you should design a message, which they call the IDEA model. Well, IDEA is an acronym, stands for I for internalization, D for distribution, E for explanation, and A for action. Those are the elements in that model. And together with me and others have done experiments testing this model, doing content analysis of newspapers and brochures and campaign messages, also doing interviews with experts, try to test to what extent this model actually works. And the pointer is that there are three elements of message design: the internalization, the action, the explanation component. All these three have to be included in the message to be successful in instructional communication. And then, of course, you have to distribute it in channels to be successful. So over the years, I think the last 10 years, I've been working partly with the Selnos. We've been doing studies on contaminated meat, foodborne illness in minced meat, where we actually tested to what extent ordinary news stories compared with designed news stories in using the IDEA model was more successful. It worked better when you actually changed the news stories in line with the proposed way a message should be designed according to the IDEA model. We also did studies in Sweden with the 72 hours campaign of crisis preparedness, where we also used the campaign that was actually done in Sweden, but we also made it more in line with the IDEA model. And we also found it was more effective. We actually used the IDEA model. They have tested also earthquake safety systems and also found the same thing. It worked pretty well. It worked even better if you used the IDEA model. And the model has also been tested with the COVID-19 and the Zika virus. So there are empirical support saying that if you actually design messages according to this IDEA model, they will actually work better. People will learn more and know what to do to protect themselves. So I would like to present the IDEA model a little bit more deeply, what it's about, and also these components, what they comprise of. So the IDEA model is 4 different components. And the first one is internalization, I. And of course, it's about how am I or people I care for affected by this risk or by this crisis. The D for distribution, as I said, that's actually not the message design component. It's about where are people seeking information? If I want to distribute the message, where are they? How can I reach them? And the E stands for explanation, and that is content in the message telling people what's actually going on here, what is happening, why is it happening, how should I understand what's going on? And then you have the last component, the A, the action component. What should I do? What's the message? What's actually in the message that I should do? Why should I care? And when we relate this to learning theory, the I, internalization, is about effective learning. And the explanation is about cognitive learning. And the action is about behavioral learning. And the main point is that you need all these 3 components in a message to design an effective instructional message. People will learn better if all these 3 are present in a message. So let's talk a little bit about the first one, internalization. What is it about? Well, it's about, of course, attention, that people will notice the message, that people will care, because there's so much information around us, surrounding us in this rich information environment, that you actually need to reach out. It could be about proximity, that is actually close to you in different ways. It's about the timing that is actually going on right now. But you can also use other ways of catching people's attention, like personalization or dramatization, or even fear, which you sometimes use in both risk and crisis communication. But the other aspect of internalization is the relevance. You have to, in the designed message, say, why? What does it mean for me? So it's actually relevant for those being reached by the message. So the internalization is about catching attention and also make it relevant, so that actually people will start listening to you. Then, of course, we have the distribution. And the distribution isn't about message design. It's about when you have the message, how do you reach the audience? And then, of course, you have the same thing, and everyone here listening knows a lot about this, of course. It's about which channels I should use, how do I reach people? I should have a consistent message, so I don't have mixed messages, and have to learn where people seek information, who do they trust, really important. And then, of course, we have to remember the convergence process. And the convergence process is that people are not usually during a crisis seeking information from one channel. They compare, they seek more information from other channels. And if people are worried, they seek even more information. And of course, if you have confusing messages, the convergence process, which people use to understand, they actually compare different sources and the messages in different sources to create a coherent picture of what's going on. So that's important. Use channels where people are where you actually meet people or reach people, and also stay on the message. That's the distribution part. But let's go back to the message design aspects. So the second design component is explaining what is going on. And this is really important, but sometimes it's overemphasized because we sometimes spend too much time in explaining things and neglecting the attention, the internalization part, and also later on the action part. And of course, the explaining part is about deliver accurate information of what's going on. And then you have the tricky part. Usually when we work with risk communication, sometimes also crisis communication, we learned that during the COVID-19 that the process, the translation process from science to information being understandable by journalists and ordinary people, that's a tricky part. And that's something we had to work very hard when we're designing messages, making sure that the explanation part is actually the message, the content, the cognitive part is actually understandable. And that is crucial. But sometimes overemphasized, because this part, the action part, the last component in the idea model, is also very, very important. The picture here is of the Swedish chief epidemiologist Anders Tegnell, who became a very famous person in Sweden during the pandemic. And here he says, "Wash your hands," tvätta händerna in Swedish. He was actually on television every day, 2 o'clock, telling us what to do and how the development of the COVID-19 pandemic continued over the years. The action part is crucial because we need not just being attentive to the message, understanding what the crisis or the risk is about, we also need what to do. We need concrete, specific action-taken steps. And we also, when we are designing messages, make sure that we are aware of what actually do people need to prepare themselves or protect themselves. And when number of studies, when we looked at news stories, we find that they often fail to include action elements. There's a lot about creating attention. This is dangerous. Take a look here, and also a lot about explanation about the risk of the crisis. But the action part, what I actually should do to protect myself, is often neglected. And we've seen in studies using the idea model that if you include the action element, people will actually be able to protect themselves better because they understand the message, they understand what to do. So that's the idea model. It's based on learning theory and also focuses on message design. But as you probably are aware of, there are a lot of other different models out there in risk and crisis communication. We listed a number of them. We have the PADM, Protective Action Decision Model. We have the CERC model, Crisis and Emergency Risk Communication. We have psychometric models, the MEDAL model. We have EPPM, the Extended Parallel Process model, and there are others. So what we try to do in this chapter, which I won't go deep into, but I just mentioned that a number of these models, and they're fine, they are really valuable in research, can also be used in practice, but they sometimes lack the message design perspective. They focus on how people perceive information, how they understand information, but they don't really focus on how we should design the message. Some of them do, some of them don't. And there are pros and cons with all of them. And of course, the idea model is not perfect. There's room for development, improvement in that model as well. But what we try to do in this chapter is that we should probably more also discuss among scholars and practitioners, could we learn from other models? Could we actually improve our models by relating to other models out there? Because they're not, they could actually be beneficial if they're actually looked into other models and improve their own models by including parts of them. So what have we learned when we wrote the chapter, and probably what you might learn from listening to me? I think that when we look at risk and crisis communication, we must focus a little bit more on the learning process, because it's needed to understand how people actually learn about things when we try to instruct them what to do so they can actually protect themselves during a crisis or in a risk situation. I think also we need to focus a little bit more on message design and its relation to these learning processes. Because message design is sometimes overlooked and underdeveloped in many theories on risk and crisis communication, but you also need to include actually how should we design the message so that people understand what to do, and so they actually also do that. And the main lesson is that when we talk about learning processes, we need a combination of effective cognitive and behavioral learning, and these components need to be included in the message design. So you can't just use effective learning or effective components. You cannot just use cognitive components or cognitive learning, or just focus on what to do. You also need to, if you're just saying what to do, people need first also pay attention and also learn why I should do it. You can't just focus on the effective part. Hey, this is dangerous. You have to explain why it's dangerous and what to do. You can't just focus on the cognitive part. This is dangerous, why? You have to make it relevant and also have to tell people what to do. So you need all those three components when we talk about message design in risk and crisis communication. And I think that was my main goal to present for you today, that you need these combination of learning outcomes to make instructional communication and self-protection successful. That's all, folks. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Bengt, for your excellent talk. If I may, we have a few minutes just to quickly clarify. If I may, I will ask the first question. Could you just say a few words about how you do this kind of research on the effectiveness of message design? So what kind of procedures are used to then test the different designs?
Yeah, for example, I showed you one of the slides with the 72 hours campaign. It was actually launched here in Gothenburg. It was a campaign using images of what you should do, actually how you should prepare a kit for crisis preparedness, what you should have at home and so on, that you should have blankets, for telephone numbers, some cash and water tanks and so on. So we took that campaign and looked at it, and then we compared, do they have the idea components in it or not? And they had it to some extent, but there were some problems in that campaign. So we took the campaign and remade it a bit in accordance with the idea model. So we changed some parts, added some. Actually, I made the new voiceover for the video, including the idea parts. And then we had an experiment testing if actually people understood it more correctly, and actually were more behavioral intention were more successful and so on. And on almost all indicators, it worked better if you actually included the idea components. So that's the experimental part, that we take one message and then we make a new design message in accordance with the idea model. But there have also been other way of testing it. They've actually been studied some news articles and just checking if they actually include idea parts or if they're actually leaving some out. And the lessons learned there is that the action part is often neglected in news stories. But experiments and also some news content analysis and so on, but mainly actual experiments.
Thank you very much. And just a quick question also, if it's possible to answer briefly. The question from the chat is about the COVID pandemic. So Sweden chose a very different management strategy than most other countries. So could you say a few words about crisis management on a national basis, how it can work or not if a particular risk is global but dealt in a very different way across the globe? So it's difficult. It may seem like a contradicting messages coming from different countries. So how does it help, or is it counterproductive?
Well, that is how long time could we spend on this? Yeah, but I would just
in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, just a short example. As I said, we weren't that fond of face masks in Sweden. Actually, we didn't use them. We used them later in later parts of the pandemic, but not in the beginning. And that was, of course, contradictory message, because globally, I think the only countries not promoting or telling people to use face masks in this late fall of 2020 was Sweden, Syria, and Nicaragua, I think, or maybe Honduras. It was 3 countries in the world not promoting the face mask for protection. And of course, that was contradicting messages, because everyone saw that everywhere else people are using face masks, and the Swedish Public Health Agency said, nah, you don't have to. And we actually did some studies on the use of face masks, where people we saw this contradiction, especially among those who didn't really trust the government. They used face masks more than those trusted government and government agencies. And this was some sort of blind trust, because we believe in our agency and then we don't use face masks. And of course, I won't go into if it's actually was accurate, the correct way of doing things, but it creates problems. And we also saw that people who used foreign news media in combination with Swedish news media use face masks more than others. So conflicting messages is always tricky when it comes to crisis. And I think that also, to some extent, undermined the Swedish Public Health Agency, that Sweden shows such a different path compared to everyone else. That is difficult and that is challenging.
Thank you so much. We may return to these topics afterwards when we'll have a more time for discussion. Now I'm going to give a floor to Patricia, and we are going to hear about very practical experiences of doing crisis communication.
Thank you.
Patricia.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stan. Good morning, everyone. Bom dia for the Portuguese people that are also following our webinar. And first of all, I would like to, of course, just thank the opportunity to participate in this really important event and speak with you about a topic that personally I consider to be absolutely critical. Just to let you know that my professional experience, more or less since 2000, has always been in the area of civil protection and also emergency management. And these are areas where crisis communication is, of course, always present. As my friend, Professor Xavier Viegas already told you, I am currently finishing a 4-year term as State Secretary for Civil Protection in the government of Portugal. And I can say that here also in this job, there were several occasions in which crisis communication was also present in my daily duties, particularly during the COVID pandemic, of course, but also during other times when we experienced emergency situations, mainly to adverse weather conditions and also, of course, due to forest fires. I'm also a mother of 2 and a grandmother of 1, and I have 2 cats, and I'm working from home today, so I hope my cats do not show up on the screen. So the first time that I was confronted with the importance of crisis communication was back in 2003, when Portugal experienced a terrible summer in which several citizens actually lost their lives, in which more than 500,000 hectares of forest burned, and in which, for the first time, if I record well, the country was in the focus of international press for reasons associated with the crisis. And I'm just a short interruption. I'm not sharing any presentation. My idea was basically to just give you some ideas and some food for thought and to contribute to the debate. So I hope that just speaking with you will be clear enough and straightforward enough. So back then in 2003, there were no social media. And the world was very, very different. And I remember well that some some communications were still done by facts. So since then, the world has changed, I would say, dramatically. And many phenomena have undergone a true globalization. Ways of communicating with the public have changed a lot also. People's expectations have also changed. Public scrutiny is now permanent, and the speed of everything that we do has also increased exponentially. And of course, crisis communication today assumes a critical and a crucial role, I would say, in all areas of governance. And if all this is extremely relevant in most areas of our society, when we talk about civil protection or emergency management systems, this importance increases exponentially. And here we are talking about the safety of our citizens, our territories, our communities, and in a nutshell, we are talking about protecting and saving lives. As Xavier Viegas said at the beginning, in 2017, Portugal once again experienced a true disaster. We lost more than 100 lives to two terrible waves of forest fires in the month of June and then October. And at the time, I was working as operational assistant at the National Civil Protection Command, and I was actually tasked with ensuring all crisis communication. And this was because at the first stages of this terrible emergency, the methods and the ways the system was communicating was not being effective, and it was not working. So we had a very top-level decision of concentrating all crisis communication at the National Civil Protection Command, and I was, in fact, the one in charge with this process. And it was perhaps one of the most complex challenges of my professional life, but from which I think I personally learned a lot, and I think that our civil protection system also learned a lot. Now, crisis communication is not exactly rocket science, but it's one of the most relevant dimensions of civil protection policies, in my opinion. In a very generic way, we can define crisis communication as the function through which organizations share information associated with emergencies, always with the aim of providing the right information at the right time to the right target. It is, in fact, a complex process, and it will only be effective if it starts long before the emergency happens. And I think that one of the most important conclusions that I reached throughout my professional life was that, or is that, the best solutions are often the simplest and the most obvious ones. So very often when we think about crisis communication, we think about how to communicate with citizens. But crisis communication, especially in this context, is much more than communicating with citizens. Crisis communication must include also the ability to communicate across the entire ecosystem in which each organization operates. And here, in this context, we must include not only citizens, but of course, the entire system, every partner organizations that for some reason is involved in the system. If we just look at the citizens' point of view, and we can all do this exercise, when facing an emergency or a crisis scenario, what do I need? And I think it's simple. I need to know what will or is happening without too complex data, because we don't need a scientific speech, and my previous colleague just mentioned this, where and when it will happen, or what effects I can expect, and what should I do and what should I not do. This is from the citizen point of view, and this is quite straightforward. Changing the mindset, and if we look from a partner organization point of view, the needs are not complex either. In the same way, I need to know what will happen or what is happening, And here, maybe I can add more detailed information. Where and when it will happen, what difficulties I can expect for the continuity of my activity, and what level of collaboration and participation is expected from my organization to contribute to the situation. So I think that crisis communication must be able to answer these simple questions, to transmit the correct information in a timely manner, and generate a feeling of responsibility and also tranquility in the ecosystem it is addressing. So from my experience and looking specifically at organizations that deal with crisis and emergency management, I identify 3 critical factors for the success of communication: trust, planning, and knowledge. So let's just talk a bit about trust. Because why do I mention trust? Because without trust, there is never any possibility of having a good communication. It is absolutely essential that the target audience of the crisis communication I'm trying to provide can effectively trust the organization and the people who are transmitting the messages and the information. But trust is not something that we can gain all of a sudden or in just 5 minutes. Trust is a process that is developed and generated and built over time. An organization that has not, through its history, created a perception of competence and effectiveness among citizens and among partners is very unlikely during a crisis to enjoy the confidence and the trust which is necessary for the message to be effective. So in short, for people to accept, to believe, and to act accordingly, a feeling of trust is absolutely essential. So moving now to the second critical factor for success, planning. An organization that tries to carry out crisis communication without planning is surely planning to fail. Crisis communication should not be seen as one of the many, should be seen, of course, as one of the many dimensions of an overall communication planning process. To have a crisis communication, it is necessary to have a global communication. And it is essential to have a vision of what we want, to define a strategy plan accordingly. And this starts long before the crisis actually begins. So waiting for the crisis to decide on how to communicate is probably the biggest mistake an organization can make. Because crises, they do generate enormous amount of stress, both personal but also institutional, which is why this will be the worst time to actually start to think about the process. In the current context, all organizations that deal with crises and emergencies because these are different situations, crisis and an emergency, we don't have time to develop on this, but it's important to understand that a crisis and an emergency is not the same. So all these organizations, they must develop a global communication plan that actually covers the entire emergency cycle. So starting from prevention, planning, preparedness, response, and recovery. And obviously, they must include a communication plan for crisis. This plan is well thought and if it is well thought and well executed, it will help to enable people to communicate effectively during crises and emergencies, and will also contribute to creating trust among the different communities. With the slot I was given today, it's impossible to detail what a crisis communication plan should be, but I think we can identify some fundamental factors that must be included in this plan. So first of all, probable scenarios. What are the scenarios that I can anticipate in which I may have to activate crisis communication mechanisms? We cannot identify all of the scenarios because we always have surprises. Let's just think about COVID. who could anticipate, who actually anticipated that we would have a global pandemic, so a worldwide crisis due to a pandemic. But we can identify those scenarios which are most likely to happen. Secondly, identification of communication instruments depending on the scenarios. Which platforms are best suited to each case and each specific moment, and the message I intend to convey. So will I use social networks? Will I use press releases? Will I perform person statements? So there is a wide variety of instruments and platforms that I can use. And we must think about this before. So in each scenario, what kind of instruments should I use to actually make sure that I convey the right message? So also, third factor, basic key messages. Without prejudice to message that can only be constructed in light of the event, there are always key messages that are they cut across the vast majority of crises, and this can be previously identified and trained. Fourth, key personnel. All organizations must identify beforehand the people who may have to support, so the staff that may have to support or intervene directly in a crisis communication process. So this is not something that I should do when the emergency is happening. I must have these people identified before, and I must train them. I must make sure that they are actually involved in the process. And finally, testing. Testing is testing a lot. I think it's and very often it's very, very important. Preferably using the people and the organizations that will be the target audience for the crisis communication process. For example, when we carry out exercises, we should always try to include this component of crisis communication and seek to involve communities, because this will increase confidence and the predisposition from the people's side, from the citizens' side. And I think it will also allow routine procedures, making sure that when a crisis or an emergency actually happens, people are not facing these procedures for the first time. So I believe that like this, we can have and we can contribute to a better crisis communication. And finally, knowledge and expertise. Organizations with responsibilities for crisis and emergency management should invest a lot in staff trained in communication. This is not something that we can do with people that are not trained, that they don't have the sufficient or the right skills to communicate. We need strong professional skills to work on communication, not only to speak with the citizens during a crisis or to make a media statement, but we need to involve people making the plans. So people working with communication, they must be professional. It is absolutely crucial, therefore, to have communication experts in the staff that work in emergency and crisis organizations. I think these people should be seen as being as important as all the other experts that work for civil protection or emergency management, like meteorology, risks, prevention, health. So this expertise is important. And of course, communication expertise is also critical. Just coming to an end of my presentation, I think that we can do everything well when managing a crisis or an emergency. But if we fail to communicate, we risk seriously to damage the entire process. So we cannot look at crisis communication just as a small piece of the job we are performing. In emergency management organizations and crisis management organizations, communication is key, and we must invest in this process in the same way that we invest in all the other phases, let's say, or cycles of the emergency procedures. And for now, this would be all. And of course, I'm available for any questions you may have. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for your excellent talk. If I may ask a little clarification, it's really interesting that you use the term ecosystem. So you were talking about how crisis communication is just not only about like communicating with the citizens or like lay people on the streets, but also with all kinds of different kinds of organizations. So could you maybe bring an example of what you may mean by an ecosystem and perhaps like a good practice of communicating via an ecosystem? Thanks.
Yes, I was expecting that question, actually. So when I use the word ecosystem, it's because nowadays civil protection and emergency management have always been cross-cutting activities. So you have usually in a country an organization which has the responsibility to deal with this kind of issues. But these organizations, they do not work alone. They cannot work alone. They work in a very wider system, which has very specific characteristics, and that's why I call it an ecosystem. And if you fail, even if you manage to do a very good communication or crisis communication with the general public, but if you fail to communicate inside the system, you will not have the levels of performance that you need, also from all the other organizations, because civil protection authorities or services, they cannot work alone. They cannot perform everything. They cannot provide all the services that the community needs. So we need to involve all the other organizations. We need to involve the health sector, and we saw it during pandemics, during the COVID pandemic. We need to involve forest service. We need to involve energy, environment, emergency medical staff. So it's really a wide range of different organizations. And if they don't feel that they are involved in the system, and when I mean in the system is also in the crisis communication process, we risk, for instance, of having contradictory information, as we were discussing before. We risk having people working back to back and not turning to each other. So for me, crisis communication is much more than talking to citizens. It's communicating within this ecosystem. And this ecosystem is becoming more and more important as in this the present context where we are living with all this climate crisis and having more and more probability of having high impact phenomena. I think we really must invest in this, and this is becoming more and more important and more complex.
Thank you so much. And also a quick question from the chat. Josephine asks, if constant non-crisis communication is so important for trust and effectiveness of crisis communication, so how could an organization establish that across institutions that lacks the need of typical day-to-day communication? So there are organizations that maybe do not communicate with the public daily all the time, and only have to engage in crisis communication. So how could then those kind of organizations build trust?
Thank you for the question. This is really important. Like I said during my intervention, I think that the only way that we can avoid failing during a crisis is to plan and to test, to exercise a lot. That's what we are trying to do in Portugal for many years now. Is trying to involve all the institutions that are most likely or even less likely to be engaged in an emergency scenario, to test their plans, to build their plans and to test their plans, and to exercise nationally, locally, and even internationally. We, for instance, in Portugal, back in 2019, we hosted one of the biggest EU exercises here in Portugal. It was the Cascade 19. And I think that we have succeeded involving all relevant civil protection organizations or associated organizations in Portugal. So if I am part of an organization, and if I know that even if it's not something that will happen on a daily basis or even every month or every 6 months. But if I know that there is even a slight possibility of having to have an active role during a crisis and having to communicate during a crisis, I need to practice. I need to plan for this. I need to have people ready to perform this kind of activities. And even perhaps an organization can ask the question, am I going, for instance, to hire a communication expert, even if I know that this is really very unlikely for me to have the need to actually communicate, or knowing that probably this is something that I will do once a year? I would say yes, it's worthwhile hiring these people, because what you gain from a good crisis communication has no price.
Thank you so much. It is a very interesting idea that really this kind of exercises can also serve the function of building trust, building public trust, rather than just learning to perhaps acquiring certain skill sets. So going beyond that.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
moving on to Marina. Marina is going to talk about then some good risk awareness campaigns as good practices. So Marina, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, Stan. Thank you very much to everybody for this opportunity. And I'm Marina Mattini. I'm from CIMA Research Foundation, that is a center of competence of Italian civil protection system. I'm the head of communication department of CIMA Research Foundation, but I'm as a researcher, I'm a PhD in international cooperation and sustainable development policy from the University of Bologna in Italy and the University of Madrid, because it's a thesis in two countries. And I'm a semiotician. I specialize in semiotics, and my research has been always addressed to social change, humanitarian communication, crisis communication, and risk communication. I led several projects also in interconnection between culture and environment, climate change and the behaviors, and so on. But in this case, I'm a mother of 3 kids. Also, I think it's important to stress, so thanks to Patricia to also stress this part of your biography, so I do the same. And I will share a little bit the screen, because in this case I would like to, sorry, because the presentation is here, okay. I would like to present this research that we are finalizing as CIMA Research Foundation and in charge by DG ECO in risk communication practices in civil protection as part of PrepareEU initiative, the flagship initiative in preparedness concerning risk communication awareness by DG ECO. So this is more or less the overview of who we are at CIMA Research Foundation. But I think that you can find easily this information into our website and all the part of the world and organization with whom we collaborate. Then the study, this mapping and feasibility study was asked by DG ECO in order to mapping the existing initiative in European Union about civil risk communication awareness. So the first part was a review across Europe and all the states participant in European Union civil protection mechanism. Then the analysis of good practices and the analysis of the list of good practices that could be feasible to scale up at European level, because the aim of this study is to assess, to give suggestions on how to on how European Union could support states in their risk communication activity, and also in order to have a coordination and a common action also in risk communication as part of the resilience goals, and also, as we already saw and we already hear too, risk communication is a very important part of every activity in concerning civil protection. So we realized a desk review, a survey, and an interview. It was a combined methodology. We had not so much time, and also the challenge was to find information in different languages, and it's not something easy to do. So we proceed also to have an interview, in-depth interview, semi-structured with national authorities in different countries, and also to have a final focus group with some states. So the result is a database with good practices that we found. We have to, of course, select this practice, and then I will show the criteria we used. But it was a very complex but necessary activities, because all states are facing this challenge of risk communication, and there are different approaches and different activities. We have no data, unfortunately. We didn't find data on 11 countries, but I think it's a living research project. So I hope to reach these countries, and we proceed with the selection of the activities. Of course, the context, the communication ecosystem we have in Europe is there is a variety and multiple activities. So we decided to go for institutional activity at national level, because the idea was to scale up, to see the feasibility of scaling up at European level. We need to go for national activities, and also for risk communication directed to citizens, even if we also found exercise and different activities, but at the end we included just sorry excuse me, but different activities from in communication, the communication directed to citizens. Also, the surveys, it wasn't easy to engage national institution, but we received these 39 answers to our questionnaire made with the collaboration also of DG ECO, and we conducted these interviews, as I said, and also with 3 experts from Austria, Cyprus, and the Netherlands. So in black you can see the people that we did an interview. So the final results is made a combination between the survey, the interview, and our desk research, of course, online, literature, everything, European project, so the European repository with different projects in risk communication that detected good practices. So we found these 64 validated practices, validated following the criteria of the national, directed to all citizens in ordinary time, and with the aim of increased awareness in preparedness facing a crisis. We also found that most of the activity was directed to a specific risk, even if there are multi-risk activities, but in there are countries that the classification of the risk, and also the main target citizens, and also schools. That is a very important it's a very important part in education in schools is something that most of the countries are already doing, with the difficulty difficulties of it, that is an activity time consuming, difficult, and also you have to think in a long program, in a long period, but it's also a priority for the states. And also we try to collect the differences now in the activities that are doing at national level. So a lot of edutainment, so exercise, game, online gaming simulation, the use of social media, graphic infographics, and so on. And also, as I said, so after the first mapping, we decided to concentrate into the practices doing in ordinary time in order of conception of preparedness as in communication in preparedness as the objective to raise awareness in citizenship, in education, in the process as stressed before, in learning and then act currently on what we learn. Also, DG ECHO asked us for specific requests if it was interested, if the country was interested to have a European risk atlas and to also to have such as a catalog of risk icons and visuals, and in organizing, excuse me again, an event, a European event in disaster preparedness. And there are countries that already are organizing an event that could be in October when there is the International Disaster Risk Reduction Day, or in March when there is the Civil Protection Day. But there are most of the countries are already doing this national event dedicated to preparedness, and others are thinking on organizing it. So we analyzed this database, these activities that we collected. We proceeded to an analysis following the 5W methodology, in what, who, when, where, why, and how. And also we found some patterns in how to address this risk communication. There is a polarization between activities that are risk-centered and other that are emergency-centered. Let's say emergency-centered, we catalog this kind of campaigns, such as the 72 hours campaign of the Preparedness Week in Sweden, and the risk-centered, for example, what Portugal is doing in the against forest fire, or also the Italian Civil Protection with the I Don't Take Risk campaign. Also, we found different concepts of preparedness and different approaches, of course, because as you know, risk communication is always related to cultural, to context, to civil society. So the challenge to find something general, it's very it's very tough, because there is a balance that have to be found between a general approach to risk communication. Everybody know how risk communication is important, so on, but then you have to lend this general idea to the context, to specific context, to the specific communities and territories. And there is a list of the good practices, because the project reviewed this analysis of 10 good practices. We try to reflect the variety we found at European level. So in the different approaches, also different regions of Europe, because there are a huge difference of the north of Europe with the south, the Mediterranean, the east, and so on, and also the different target. But I think it's a good list. We found very interesting ideas, and not only ideas, but also as you know, how difficult it is for a national institution with that are facing emergency and crisis, and protect communities, dedicated time and resources to communication. So also the sustainability of the activity was an important factor for the analysis. In general, general, also we found some gaps, no, because the idea of European Union is to fill these gaps, supporting countries in their risk communication awareness activities. So the general gaps we found in our research is the human resources, as always, not only the lack, no, of the quantity, no, of people, but also the difficulty to gather different teams, the expert in communication, the expert in civil protection. It's always difficult to put together people, especially when inside a country, when there are different objectives. So this coordination is something that could be useful also at European level. Of course, funds, because the communication is always the Cinderella of the activities in general, even if everybody knows that it's very important, but it's also difficult to have fund to invest for campaign activities, respecting all the criteria that should an effective campaign, effective activity should be. And also coordination, also inside the state, but also at regional level and at European level, and the lack of the general frameworks, guidelines, and the common identity in the risk communication. After we proceed also in another analysis of the list of the activities that we found, we have to analyze at the end also just five activities that could be feasible to be a model for scalability at European level. So we use this criteria for this analysis. So the evidence-based, the inclusive, the inclusion, the reach, the sustainability, and transferability in order to scale at European level. There are these five analyses, so that now it's not time to analyze all of them in depth, but there are the Aldeia Segura in Portugal against forest fire, the Preparedness Week of Sweden, that also is the idea that are following also Norway and Finland, Vigio France, that is not a pure communication campaign, but it's a very good initiative that France put in place last year, facing the severe drought they are facing. So it's a repository very interesting with an hub of accurate information, and it's a cooperation between different ministries of France to give information, at the same time the legal restriction in water, and also suggestion for different targets. And I Don't Take Risk in Italy, that is a multi-risk campaign that has been doing since 2011 with a very important component of civil protection volunteers, and also with the mechanism of training of trainers based on the knowledge of risk, and then the translation into communication messages. And the campaign, the audiovisual campaign, Always in Forest Fire that Greece did last year, also accompanied with a big exercise they realized, including vulnerable people and connected to their activity in schools. I skip. We did also SWOT analysis in this. In the activity we found, so now I'll skip the analysis, but it's of course that we will publish. We are now in the last part of the report, so that will be available. So there are SWOT analysis that we did, and the end of our research, we are now finalizing the last report is in the assessment in the assessment a suggestion on which activities could be made at European level, taking into account, it's very important always to stress, find the right balance of not overcharge not overcharging the member states, of course, but at the same time trying to support their activity and also supporting the coordination and the exchange between the different countries. So we are now finalizing with the concept notes in some suggestion about what the European Union could do, taking into account that a participatory approach is with the member states and also with the engagement of citizens. But the idea is to spread this culture of protection as a self-protection, but with the final aim to a community protection. This is the idea that we are working on, and also that European Union will try to work into the PREPARE-EU flagship initiative. So I'm done. I know that it's very fast, but it's just to have an overlook on on our research. I stop share my screen. So thank you very much. I tried to stay in 20 minutes.
Thank you, Marina. I actually suggest that perhaps you could still share your slides, and as we have a couple of more minutes, could you perhaps just choose out of those 5 practices that you kind of identified as good practices, choose one and tell us a little bit more about perhaps your favorite project, or the one that you think was perhaps the best one in your view, and tell us about that particular project. Just you can return to the slide about that particular project and tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. It's difficult to, of course, thank you. It's difficult to choose a particular project, but if I think that these 5 have a good example of different approaches, but at the same for different necessity, But if I had to go in depth into 2 of them, I choose Vigio France because I think it was a very good example of a mix between an emergency communication, because drought was made when the drought in France was really severe, so it was something that they had to put in place in a very short time, even if of course it's founded on data and the scenarios that already are into the scientific centers. But I think it was a very good example of how to put in a simple website all information in a very easy way, all information citizens could need. We talked before about the accuracy of the message, and also one message, no contradictory message. This was a very good example because it's such an hub of also with the collaboration of Meteo France, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Environment. They put together all these data that are open data available, so they give reliable information and accurate information, easy, and also everyone could put their address and say which kind of water restriction there are in that concerning the people where and every day. And also there are a lot of suggestions on behaviors, very easy suggestion, key messages on water consumption at individual level, but also for agriculture and so on. So I think it's a very good way to, and it's associated to an app that citizen and also everybody can download. You have this information always with you, even if there is also so it's just in French, so maybe for someone that the tourist or someone is moving to France that don't know French is difficult, but I think it's a very good example. And another one also is Portugal, because it's a completely different action because they work a lot in proximity, in community leader, really in the last mile, no, to the communication, but also they have put in place a system of evaluation and monitoring of their activity. So they really monitor the results of the campaign, the activity that all that are built in giving information in rural community, in really reach people that need this information, in building in trust, because there are the community leaders that people trust, so they hear from them and they trust them. And also this system of monitoring and evaluation that put together the investment they are doing in human resources and funds, and also the results they are rich. So I think there are two very good examples, but also the other three are very good.
Thank you so much for this. I think we will now have a little bit more time to reflect on each other's presentations, and also I encourage all the other speakers to ask questions from each other. But if I may just kind of try to start the discussion by perhaps focusing on one aspect that was, I think, mentioned in all of the three presentations, and that is the question of the use of different channels for risk and crisis communication. So Bengt in his talk talking about the idea model used the term distribution. So distribution concerning where are people seeking information, so which kind of channels should be used for giving instructions. So I would ask Bengt to perhaps expand a little bit on that one. What may be the good practices in terms of choosing then the channels for distributing instructions. And in Patricia's talk, she did mention as a part of planning, thinking in terms of platforms, and also making sure that different organizations are sharing information. So I was wondering what kind of channels of communication may be used for this kind of inter-organizational communication within the kind of the ecosystem of civil protection. And then the question to Marina would be, you did mention that the risk awareness campaigns included things like games, online games, and perhaps also like online platforms like social media. So maybe you could bring examples of what kind of platforms, including social media platforms, were used in the 5 good risk awareness campaigns that you identified. So who would like to go first? Maybe Bengt, would you like to start?
I can start. Well, there have been big changes when I grew up, we had 2 television channels in Sweden and 3 radio channels, and that was all. We had newspapers, of course, and when something was broadcasted at night, we could go to school the next day and everyone has watched the same program, right? That's not the case anymore. And that is also, of course, a challenge when you communicate in terms of risk and crisis communication. You need to know which channels are people using, where do they seek information. And that is a challenge when you have trying to do risk and crisis communication, not at least because your perception as a communicator might not be the same as those actually you're trying to communicate with, because we saw that during the epidemic, of course, what we saw in many countries was that broadcasted media actually worked quite well to spread information to a large portion of the community, but we missed some parts, and especially migrant populations, those low resources populations, so on. And after a while, it took some time before the authorities adapted and realized that we actually could not use the same channels we were always using to reach out to migrant population and other hard to reach populations. So you need to have a palette of different ways of communicating with society today. And the tricky part is that those who need information the most are the hardest to reach. So the one you reach with your broad channels, with your mainstream media and so on, fine, they reach a large part of the population, but the low resource groups and those who actually probably most affected by a crisis are those who usually are the hardest to reach. And that's a challenge for all of those of us working with risk and crisis communication. I used the symbol of that we actually have an inverted pyramid when we communicated during the pandemic. We reached everyone first. And then after a while, we adapted the information to translated information, used new channels, personal communication, and so on after a while. But we should actually flip the pyramid. So actually try to reach the vulnerable populations first. The small group, of course, but they are probably the most affected. And that's a challenge for risk and crisis communication.
Thank you very much. So maybe Patricia would like to comment then on this kind of communication channels, ways of communicating between the organizations then.
Yes. Thank you so much. And just can I just pick up on something that Ben just shared with us about this critical aspect of finding the best way to reach those who need more this information and who are at the same time the hardest to reach. And we experienced that particularly during the forest fires, the most complex forest fires. Well, when you have these big fires, they tend, of course, to happen on forest areas and not in urban areas. And when we talk about forest areas, deep forest areas, unfortunately, most of the times we are talking about people that need to be protected before the fires. They need to know if we have a fire risk or not. And if the fires are already happening, we must be able to convey the right message to those people. We must be able to tell them at a minute, because this is not something that you say 2 days before. It's something that you need to say when the things are actually happening. You need to make sure that they know if they should stay at home or if they should evacuate or what kind of things they must take with them. So that's why we developed the problem, which Marina just mentioned before, Aldeia Segura, Pessoa Segura in Portuguese. So in English, it would be safe people, safe village, safe people. Because we had this difficulty of finding the right platform to speak to those people at the right time. And this program, which was developed, it started already after the big fires in 2017. It's a target-specific project. So it's something that is developed throughout the whole year, but it involves local communities, it involves parishes, it involves local leaders, it involves the small villages, and we are trying to motivate them and to encourage them to build plans to find safe places in the village, because sometimes we cannot have time. We may not have time to evacuate people from those villages when they are surrounded by big fires. And we have identified in each of these village or small village a person who acts like a leader, who is the focal point to whom the local civil protection services can speak and can pass on the message. And we are doing a lot of tests, a lot of exercises with this target audience, because we understood that it would be very difficult to reach those people through the regular platforms. If you are talking about an 8-year-old lady who lives alone in a small house in a very small village in the middle of a mountain, this person is not going to be reached by Twitter, maybe not even through a press statement. Maybe she has a radio or something, but It's really, really tricky. And if you want to go to reach these hardest targets, you need to find something which is tailor-made. We need to make something specific for those targets. Then you can have of course, all the other platforms that actually reach a lot of people. But for instance, Twitter or social media, most people that are in contact with these platforms are probably not the ones who will need to inform during critical situations, for instance, for forest fires. It can be, of course, very helpful for other types of scenarios. So this is something I wanted to pick up from Ben's intervention, because this is really a tricky question. Can I go to the other question you made concerning the communication in the ecosystem, or can I?
Yes, please do. Yeah, inter-organizational.
Okay. The tools that we found and the methods that we have to make sure that we have a permanent communication with our partners. For instance, if we take on the Portuguese example, it may not be perfect, but it's something that we have been developed throughout the last 20 years, and I think it's working. Really, I think it's working. We have this network, this national network, which then duplicates or multiplicates through the regional level, to the sub-regional level, and to the local level. So those are operational coordination center and civil protection commissions, which meet very often, at least once a week, at local, sub-regional, regional, and national level. You have these meetings with all the entities which are relevant for the civil protection system in Portugal. And we involve the armed forces, police, the National Guard, the health care system, social security systems, you name it. So all the services that may have, even if it's just a slight piece of responsibility in the system, they meet regularly every week, at least, if nothing is happening. If we have an emergency ongoing, or if we foresee that we'll have an emergency, we can convey, let's say, special meetings, and we can even have these people on a 24-hour basis sitting in the same room to make sure that we have all this coordination. And I think that the communicating links that we established in this ecosystem are then very helpful when we then move to the crisis communication scenario, because these are people who have been working together for many years. They share the same language, they share the same knowledge, they share the same perspectives, they have the same operation, a common operational picture. And this is really very helpful to make sure that we have an effective risk or crisis communication. This is really important. And then for the public, I think we just have to make sure that we find the right channel to make sure that we reach as many people as possible. Just a final remark, because someone wrote on the Q&A chat something about early warning systems, and this is really very important. With the scenario that we have today, knowing that we may have really complex emergencies, having a disruption effect, which is really a really strong disruption effect, early warning systems are critical for crisis communication, because the sooner you get the information concerning something which is likely to happen, the sooner you can have an effective communication, the sooner you can alert people, the sooner you can convey the right message. And this is how you can have a proper risk and or crisis communication, to make sure that you reach the right people at the right time with the right information. And if we want to protect lives, because I think in the end it's our target, this is all about protecting lives and our communities. Early warning systems should be one of the biggest investments people organizations and countries should be making, and it's one of the most relevant lines of intervention from the United Nations. Early warning for all, because it's really critical and it makes a difference. It actually saves lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for making this very, very important point about early warning. So on to Marina, your reflections on the use of channels for risk awareness campaigns, including social media and also games, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, we found, of course, that there are a lot of activities that involve different channels, no? So social media, of course. So I think everybody, every institution we interview, we got is they have social media. They take care of how to spread information through social media. But if I can pick something, but also there are different tools that you can use. If I have to pick something that was very, very interesting, I have to pick the podcast that Swedish Civil Protection did, Clara Fardiga, that is part of a huge campaign of Preparedness Week that they have in Sweden. They organize in Sweden in this in the sense of be prepared, no? If a crisis or war comes, that is a very good way not to reach young people, but also to use an innovative, not so innovative, but another tools. The idea is to be that they have to be cross media. No, you have to take into account that you have to spread the same message with the same coherence, accuracy throughout the different social media. Also, Italian Civil Protection last year realized a comic for the students of secondary school that was l'attimo decisivo, the decisive time, that it's a very good way also to communicate to a specific target about the importance to know the right behavior in case of an emergency risk. It was declining in different risks with different characters, of course, very close to this target, no, young people in secondary school. And it worked very well because it was a comic that was distributed in all secondary schools in Italy, also accompanied with a social media campaign, with a website, with also an audiobook. That is something. I have 3 kids, 2 of them are one of them in that age, and they listen a lot, more than I suppose they listen podcast and so on. So just two of them, there are a lot, but I think that it's very important. Was also Patricia and also Bent stressed that this coordination and also the importance to reach the most vulnerable people, because it's really very important. Also DGECO is working on that. Also UNDRR more and more in how important is to protect the most vulnerable people before concentrate the effort in a crisis, and also to reach with different tools and different same messages, but in a different way, no? So thank you.
Thank you so much. I can see that Domingos has raised hand. Domingos.
Thank you very much, Stan. I'd like to bring let's say another perspective to the problem. Most of us citizens, we receive this information from the media, and this comes through the journalists, the guys that are in the field, that ask questions, that interview people, mayors, operational, and we have been speaking about the crisis management from the perspective of the institutions, let's say from the national or so institutions. How can this crisis communication be handled when there are different people, agents on the ground looking for other messages, and sometimes they can collect messages and convey messages that are not exactly in line with what the agencies they want to transmit or to convey. Shall we shut down those journals? Shall we educate them? What is the way? This is a question that I ask to all of you.
I could respond to that if you want to.
Please do.
Thank you, Domingos. Good question. First of all, I think we need to realize that doing risk and crisis communication will be in a rhetorical arena with multiple voices. That's actually the world we live in. I don't think we can shut the journalists down. I don't think it's actually we want to do that. So that's the world we live in. We have to adapt to that situation. I think there is actually a lesson learned during the COVID-19 in relation to the media, and that is that we need to help to educate journalists, and the news organizations need to be more, they have to be more knowledgeable about science and how science works. Because what we've seen in Sweden and many other countries is that media is actually having problems with their revenues. They have to close down a lot of newspapers and so on. And they don't have many reporters being specialists in different areas. But what they need to do, and what is actually, some actually, at least in Sweden, some news organizations have recruited science journalists to be able to meet those misinformation, disinformation, and other voices to actually make sure that they report what is accurate. Because the news media organizations are also really afraid of all the propaganda, disinformation, misinformation circulating, because they also want to, at least most of them, to report accurate news. So they have a job to do, and maybe also we have a work to do in meeting and talking to journalists, because I don't think we should not talk to journalists. I think we should talk more to journalists and learn them about how science works, how cross communication works, and also they need to do some work on their part as well. So let's work together on this.
If I can intervene on this, because as CIMA, we did also research after a floods event in the Marche region in September, analyzing the media, the newspapers, the titles, and I have to say that it's something that we found some pattern, that is the culpability, the try to the uncertainty on the science, the misinformation, and we need really to train journalists. But before the events, we really need so journalists, for example, I don't know in the other nation, but in Italy they have obligatory, it's mandatory that they have to follow training and courses, updated courses. So we need really to, as a civil protection, but also other institutional organization, give them a glossary, because sometimes they use words completely different, and also how to address a situation, but not only in emergency, but also before the emergency, because when the event happens, you already know what is happening, how to talk about that. And also it's very important by the side of the institution to have a spokesperson, not a lot of people talking, have a spokesperson or few spokesperson, and also to be prepared with the press release, because when something happens, everybody's looking for information, everybody's looking for the story, the most spectacular story. You have to try to control this. Of course, as Ben said, you cannot control the infodemic, or you cannot control completely the fake news, but you can act before we giving materials, giving trusted source of information, so you can a little bit control more, because the first information is the most important. So the time also when you act is very, very important.
Thank you. Patricia, would you like to add something?
Yes, please. So I fully agree with Marina and also with Bent. And in fact, I mean, you cannot shut people down. I mean, it's almost impossible. And trying to avoid stories, or trying to let's say to hide information is the worst thing that one can do. So I think that we must look really, for me, the best solution to avoid conflicting information, to avoid a lack of coordination in terms of the information you provide to the citizens and to the organizations. The critical thing is to look at communication the same way we look at the operational intervention. If we need to have coordination procedures to make sure that all the organizations involved in firefighting are doing their job, we must have the same for communication purposes. If we have a big response operation or a big crisis going on, like COVID, involving different organizations. The same way we establish coordination procedures for the operational intervention, we must establish coordination procedures for communicating to the public. We need to know in advance who speaks about the health dimension, who speaks about, for instance, the response operations, who speaks about evacuation procedures. And we must, you don't have to have just one person speaking, but you need to have the people who are actually speaking, coordinating the kind of message they are trying to convey. And I think this is the best solution to make sure that we actually meet the requirements and to be effective.
Thank you so much. I can see that Daniela has raised hand.
Yes, but can you hear me now? It works. Oh, very good. So my question is about communication in peacetime, so not during the emergencies or the crisis, and is about the effectiveness and, how can I say, the permanence of the effects in communication over time. My question is for all of you, and have you had the opportunity to study or to verify how a communication, even a communication that's well done, then has effects, for instance, a year later or after a long period? This is particularly important in prevention activities, because if we explain or communicate about prevention activities and then we are not able to verify that there is a permanence in this information, these activities will be not undertaken and the communication will fail. So this is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And this question actually ties in with several questions in our chat, which ask about how this kind of effects of risk and crisis communication could be measured or should be measured. So who would like to answer first? Bengt, are you willing to go first?
Yeah, well, I think in general, the crisis communication is difficult in many ways, but it's not that difficult to get people's attention because actually something happening. When it's about crisis preparedness, that's harder because you want to tell people that something might happen in the future, and then you have to prepare for that. And that is the hardest thing to do. And we have seen using this kind of studies that people understand and people pay attention, but they're actually not planning to do anything. No, they're not actually buying the kit at home. And that is the tricky part. Of course, when there's a threat around us, like the COVID or the Ukraine war or something like that, then people's attention get higher. But we have to, I think, what Patricia talked about training, about also having this kind of preparedness week we have in Sweden once a year, repeating. And what we want to accomplish is actually that people will prepare for different crises the same way as we do when we drive a car and put the seatbelt on. We don't even think about it, just do it. It's internalized, but it's really hard to get there. And I think it's, well, external threats are helping us for crisis preparedness. I knew that because when I was in Florida, they didn't had a hurricane for 10 years and people they forgot about it, how to do. And then the hurricane came and people weren't prepared when there's a hurricane every year, people prepare. So I don't want crisis, but it helps us actually when it comes to crisis preparedness. But I think practice, having this kind of weeks that everyone pays attention to it might help. Thank you.
And in the chat, we also have a specific question to Patricia concerning then the Safe People, Safe Villages program. So are the effectiveness of communication within those programs measured in certain ways, and how this could be done? Patricia.
Thank you, Stan. Before going to that question, let me just go back a bit on what Bengt was saying and on Daniel's question, because yes, it's really hard. It's easy to get people attention when something is actually happening. So people, they quickly realize that they do need the information. Sometimes I make myself this question. If we had started an information campaign on pandemics 6 months before COVID, if anyone had paid attention. Probably not, zero, or close to zero. In Portugal, after 2017, when we lost 100 lives, people finally realized through the worst way possible that this was a true problem and that we needed to change dramatically the scenario. And we succeeded, I think, in taking the leverage of this situation and building on the fact that people were now finally open to receive this kind of information. And we developed several campaigns. Safe Village, Safe People is one of the campaigns. We don't have an exhaustive or a scientific way of measuring the effects of that campaign. I think Professor Domingos is really very keen on studying this project, and I think he might have more information and more precise information on this. But I think it's something we should work on. But I think that the best sign is that after 2017, we never lost another civilian life to the fires, ever since we started these campaigns and these projects. The second campaign we started right after these big fires in 2017 was, it's still ongoing. It's a big national campaign. It's called Portugal Chama. In English, it would be like something like Portugal calls on you, like calls on you to be part of the system and to understand that we all need to change our behaviors, because forest fires are difficult, are complex, but it's the responsibility. Let's say the responsibility does not lay exclusively on the side of the authorities. We also need people on board to prevent forest fires, to adapt their behavior to the forest scenarios, to avoid doing some kind of things, especially during the summer period or when we have very hot days and very low humidity levels. And we managed to go from a situation, these are precise numbers I'm giving you. We managed to move from a situation when, in average, during the summer, we had days with approximately 400, 500 fires a day, to today's scenario, which has improved a lot. And nowadays we have, in average, 100, 120 forest fires a day. So it was quite a decrease. And I really think that this information campaign and also the projects that we were talking, they gave a huge contribution to this change of mentality and this change of, let's say, of the ways people actually behave themselves and look at this at the situations and also at their own behaviors.
Thank you so much, and I would like to hear also Marina's thoughts on the kind of the effects of the campaigns and how this could be measured.
Yeah, what I have to say that it's difficult to measure. So you could measure something if there are data. And in communication, sometimes people miss to recollect data when they are doing action. So all the data of the communication action, so the dissemination, the KPIs, everything, you have to collect this. And then during the time monitoring, and then you can have a combination between these communication result, let's say, then, you know, we have the engagement index. We have a lot of index now that we can more or less measure how a communication campaign was, but you need to compare that with the behaviors, the scientific data, and so on. So you need really to have this data, and you cannot do that in a very short period of time, because from communication to a behavior, we see the idea models is not something that you can do in a day. But I think it's very, very important. I insist a lot of institutions, they have to collect data. Sometimes they don't collect data in communication.
So much. I'm afraid that our time is up by now. So I'm really truly grateful to Ben, Patricia, and Marina for their really insightful presentations. I did learn a lot. I've jotted down a long list of different dimensions and parameters to take into consideration when evaluating risk and crisis communication. And I think this is a really useful basis for us, for our research project, also to understand good practices in the field better, and we look forward, to also to collaborating with the participants, and feel free to contact us, send an email to me if you come up with any other useful or good examples of risk and crisis communication practices that could be also perhaps mapped within our research project. Thank you so much. And then I think Domingos would like to say something also.
Thank you very much, Sten. Also, the same words. I was very, I learned quite a lot in this webinar, and I thank the speakers, and I thank also all the participants for their contribution with questions and comments that they made. And I realized that this is a very important topic in all the crisis management. And one word that I retain is trust. We have to create trust, and that comes from working together and not putting anyone aside. And that's what we are trying to do in our projects, let's say, to the dialogue with everyone and to bring everyone on board and on this very important topic. Thank you very much. Daniela, I don't know if you want to say some final words.
No, just to thank you very much, speakers, participants, and you, Stan and Domingos, for the organization, and see you soon, and goodbye to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.